What transpired on Lake Nicaragua was that Jack and Bert had just finished up, along with myself, my daughter, and Chris Keir, teaching at the Bible Institute in Huigalpa. Chris, my daughter, and myself had returned on Saturday, but Jack and Bert stayed behind to do some fishing on Lake Nicaragua with some Nicaraguan friends.
And so Jim and I had gotten the phone call that the guys were missing. That's all we knew, was that they had gone fishing and they didn't come back when they were supposed to.
And Jim called me, and I was just stunned when he told me that Jack and Bert and many of our Nicaraguan friends who were on the boat were missing. Did not know exactly what was going on then. It was difficult to get information back.
And so, boy, that first phone call was difficult, but it was because we just didn't know anything. And we knew that communication there is very difficult. That was a hard night.
I knew Jack and Bert from the ministry in Huigalpa that Fellowship Bible Church had going on, and they were both teachers at the Bible Institute. Jack had been here for several times, so I knew Jack a little better than I knew Bert. So I knew Bert for about a week. So after a week of ministry and teaching, we decided to go and spend a day with Pastor Saturnino and his family, and we went down to Puerto Diaz, which is on Lake Nicaragua. Lake Nicaragua is around 45 miles wide by 90 miles long. That's the size of the lake.
On Sunday morning, Jack and Bert and 8 Nicaraguans went out to an island which was about 4.5 miles from the shore.
There are 3 to 4 small islands near Puerto Diaz, and there was a bigger one, and we decided to go to that one because we heard some people lived on the island, on that small island. And we got there and tried to fish and I say tried because we never caught a fish. We never caught a fish. So, but it was fun. It was fun.
The boat that they were on was a boat that should have had about 6 people in it at most, but they had 10 people in it. Another factor to keep in mind in terms of what happened later was the owner of the boat had instructed the young man who was driving the boat to bring back some firewood. So they put about 200 pounds of firewood into the boat, and they all crawled back into the boat, now 10 people plus the firewood, and they started making their way back from the island.
It was like 4:30 p.m. and we decided it was time to go back. It was time to head back, and as we were going back to Puerto Diaz, we had the wind, as we say in Nicaragua, we had the wind against us. So the wind made the boat kind of jump. So the water would make the boat jump. And I was very nervous.
I remember my father told me, "We are not playing. This is serious." A short minute later, a wave lifted us up and the boat was swamped. Swamped meaning that the front of the boat went under the water. It was devastating. We began to fight for our lives.
The boat submerged, part of it anyway, and the boat was sticking straight up with the anchor holding it in place. And 10 people were trying to hold on to the tip of the boat sticking out of the water.
So the 2 sons grabbed a cooler, and at some point, they were pushed by the waves, and they were separated from us. And it was a moment, it was a time everybody was just exhausted and tired. So they couldn't come back. and they were resting on the cooler. So Jack and Bert decided to join them, and as they were joining the boys, Jack said to me, "Tell everybody to stay with the boat. Stay with the boat as long as you can."
Jack and Bert didn't want Garrett and Jasser to be on that cooler alone. They weren't sure how well they, what type of swimmers they were. So they left the boat and went to be with Garrett and Jasser on the cooler.
I remember well. I was getting tired and couldn't swim anymore. Jack and Bert had the great idea to take a wooden push pole, cross it over the cooler to make a floating device. We had positions. I remember perfectly. Bert was in the corner at the end of the pole on the right. Jesser was at the left side of the cooler. I was on the left side. My brother was on the right side. And Bert was at the right side at the end of the pole.
Miss Elida, the boy's mother, she was crying. She was crying, and she told her boys to take care, to be careful, and she was having some chest pain by that moment already.
Right after they floated away, probably 45 minutes after the accident occurred, the pastor's daughter lost her grip on the boat. She fell away. Pastor Saturnino saw this happen. He let go of the boat to push her back up onto the boat.
When he pushed her toward us, I grabbed her fingers and was able to pull her. But Pastor Saturnino was too far from us, too far from the rest of us. And he was pushed by a wave, and I saw him come back up. He was underwater, came back out, and I saw him being covered, swallowed by a big wave, and that was the last time we saw him.
Pastor Saturnino's wife, Elida, died almost immediately of a heart attack. So they both died almost at the same time. Pastor Saturnino just went down. They did tie a rope around Elida's legs to try to salvage her body.
Later at night, the body disappeared. Elida's body disappeared. We saw the ropes. We still had the ropes with us, but because the ropes were attached to the tip of the boat. We saw the knots, but the body was gone.
Meanwhile, the cooler is floating away by the currents. About 9 the next morning, Jack realized that the folks on the cooler were going to have a better chance of making it if he wasn't holding them back.
I will never forget the two things that they did for us. Jack and Bert. Jack first. Jack, with my little bit of English, from what I could understand, was saying that we were young and they had already lived. I thought it was for whatever reason, because at any time the waves could come and take us, and we would drown. We wouldn't even have a chance to say goodbye. They continued talking to each other, but I could not understand them. To my surprise, in one moment, Jack kissed us. He kissed me on the forehead and my brother too. He told us that he loved us, and he returned to his place on the pole. Suddenly, in an instant, a big wave came and he let go.
He let go. They tried to pull Jack back up, but Jack was gone.
Before we were rescued, I was sitting. I didn't have any more strength in my legs. My legs were tired, my arms were tired, my neck was tired, and I was so sleepy. And so I decided to try to sit on the tip of the boat. It was painful, but I had to give my legs a break. And everybody else was still around there and just waiting to see what would happen. So sometime between 4:30 and 5, I was falling asleep, sitting on the tip of the boat. The boat captain, Carlos, said, "Hey, there's a boat coming, there's a boat." And so I opened my eyes and I see the boat. It's real. The boat got close, and it was a small boat, small boat. And so we got in the boat. We got on the boat, and the people who rescued us were the people from the island. Were the people from the island where we had spent the day. The gentleman's name is Humberto. I asked Humberto, "Hey, Humberto, how did you hear about it? Did you hear about it? What happened? Did you have a clue we were missing?" And he said, "Yes, the radio. We heard the radio. They were announcing it, and we saw your stuff. Last night, we saw some of your stuff floating around the island, just around the island." And he said, "We knew you guys were missing, and we came out. We went searching for you, but we didn't see you." But they didn't search long enough. The accident happened almost halfway between the island and Puerto Diaz shore. So he said, we thought you were all dead. But he said at 3 p.m., the lady's body showed up at our house, in front of our house. Elida's body shows up, and he said they decided to navigate or go to Puerto Diaz and talk to the police, to the Ministry of the Health Ministry of Nicaragua. Just somebody, that the first body was there already. And as we were coming to Puerto Diaz is when my wife saw you guys. He said his wife was nervous and she didn't want to go with him, but he said, "Please go with me." So they left the kids. They left their kids with grandma, with Humberto's mother. So he said, on our way there, my wife saw you, and she didn't want to come, but she's the one that saw you guys. And so that's how we rescued you. And we understood. The four of us looked at each other, and we understood that was not a coincidence. The body was missing. It disappeared during the night. And I think it was a power of God that took the body at night and sent it exactly in front of Humberto's house, so that he would decide to go to Puerto Diaz, and on his way he could see us. I think that was God's hand, God's power, God's plan.
Meanwhile, the search party had come back from rescuing the folks on the boat, and people were dispatched to head out onto the lake to see if they could find the four people who had left the boat with the cooler.
Later, the next day, Bert took off his shirt. He gave me his watch, and he told me something that I still haven't forgotten. He said, "Tell my wife to remember my last kiss."
Bert followed Jack's example and let go.
The fatigue was incredible. The sun, hunger from no food. Well, it was a very hard situation. But Tuesday, around noon, they rescued us. Because God gave me life first. And second, one way or another, my brother and I owed our lives to two men, Jack and Bert. They gave their lives for us. I will never forget this.
And I always remember feeling when I got that first call, why is this happening, and this will destroy the work that we're doing there.
I felt very apprehensive, number one. I wondered, can and will this ministry continue? Will people think that too high of a price has been paid? Will people think that it's just too dangerous to go to Nicaragua? Will the Nicaraguans be angry with us because they had lost two very well-respected people as well?
Right after Jack and Bert's death, I was very aware of thinking that the ministry in Nicaragua must be so significant that Satan is trying to attack it. I was never at a point where I thought that ministry of Bible Institutes in Nicaragua was something that we shouldn't continue.
I was determined that after losing good people here and there who had given their lives for others and for the sake of the gospel, I felt very determined that the best way to honor those people was to continue the ministry that they had given their lives for.
Their legacy and their vision were just embraced by some of us that had already been involved and many who hadn't been involved, who desired to become involved.
So the question was never whether we should continue. The question was, what will the attacks on our ministry in Nicaragua look like in the future? Because this is a significant thing enough that Satan would attack it in this way. Jack is passionate about everything he does. He was a passionate dentist, a passionate Boy Scout leader, and passionate about his walk with the Lord, passionate about singing, and passionate about mission work. He was passionate about everything he did.
Anyone that spent any amount of time with Jack just fell in love with Jack. He was fun to be around, always easy to be with.
I got to know Jack when he and Wanda came to the church, which were several years before we went to Nicaragua, and he was always upbeat, always had a lot of energy, always entered in and engaged in conversation and offered his input and thoughts, but was just an easy guy to be around and a fun guy to be around, so he became a friend.
Jack was also a very generous man. He gave of himself, and one thing that Jack always had with him was lots of gum, and he gave it away by the pack.
I would say Jack's particular commitment to missions was wanting to make an impact for a long time in some place.
Jack had a great sense of humor. Jack was always smiling. He was very interesting when he taught because he was very creative with his illustrations, and everyone just had a great time watching Jack teach with creativity and humor. Another thing that comes to mind when I think of Jack is that Jack was not very good with language, his own or Spanish.
Jack Logan's Spanish was, it was pretty bad. I remember one time he said to me, "Well, son, my English is so bad that I'm never going to try to speak Spanish anymore, ever again," because he tried a couple times and it didn't go well. Yeah, most of the translators were afraid to translate for him. I remember they would all ask me, okay, so who's going to translate for who? But what they were really trying to find out was who's going to translate for Jack.
Bert, I had known Bert actually longer than Jack. Bert was also a fun guy to be around, just had a dry sense of humor, always engaging, loved his family.
I would describe Bert as someone who was well respected. All of my interactions with Bert were very open, warm, and Bert was someone who was very easy to be with.
Boy, Bert was an adventurer. Bert is half Cuban, and you can feel that, but Bert was up for adventure.
Bert was also someone who was eager to learn. I remember, as I said, visiting his community group on several occasions, and he was always full of really good questions, and he wanted to get it right.
I remember the night that he committed to start going to Nicaragua. We were up at his house, and Jim and I were there, and they have this gazebo that looks out over the city up on Round Mountain. And we went out to the gazebo, and there was a big thunderstorm that had just rolled through the city. And we're sitting there just in the aftermath of that thunderstorm, talking about the impact of the thunderstorm. And Bert reflecting and just going, before I die, I want to have an impact. I want to have an impact, something like this thunderstorm rolling through here that when it comes through, after it's done, something's come through. Bert and Jack's legacy here at Fellowship is probably, for most people, the ministry in Nicaragua. And there are a lot of people who know we go to Nicaragua that probably don't know the story we're telling. So there's an aspect of their legacy that is a ministry. But there's another aspect of what those men have left behind that is the mark that they have left on individual lives. The mark that they've left on Jim Wilson and Tommy Walker and Chris Keir and Cairo Farinas and Melvin Losa. The mark on Arlen Flores and Ken Wilson. The mark that they've left on individual men who are in ministry serving the Lord. Saturnino's son, Garrett, who is pastoring a church now. There are individual lives that have been deeply marked by those men, and they wouldn't be doing the things they're doing or the things they're doing in the way they're doing them if it would not have been for Bert Alexander and Jack Logan.
Jack and Bert remind us that following Jesus is not easy. It's costly. And their legacy reminds us that they're a challenge to that soft and easy brand of Christianity that is attractive to so many people.
You hear constantly about wanting to finish well. And they were such an example of finishing well. Not even knowing that the finish was near. And at the end, they demonstrated tremendous faith, tremendous encouragement to those that were around.
With Bert, his last thought being of his wife. With Jack basically commissioning Garrett to make his life count for the Lord with his last words. I think when those two men stepped into eternity, the Lord said, "Well done. You've lived well and you died well."
Jack and Bert leave behind a legacy of self-sacrifice. They gave their lives so that others could live.
I think both the loss of Jack and Bert, as well as Saturnino and Elida, the two Nicaraguans that were lost, has really grown people's commitment to not let their death be in vain, to lose them and not say, we're going to make something of it, would be a travesty. And I know there are a lot of people, including myself, who are committed to leaving a legacy for the Lord, but in honor of the sacrifice those men made. The events that took place on the lake 10 years ago have impacted Fellowship in terms of our commitment to missions and our focus in missions. We doubled down rather than lightening up. Before all of this, we never would have talked about what we now talk about as legacy missions where we want to have a long-term impact. Currently, we have a commitment to a legacy in the Czech Republic, a legacy with Operation Christmas Child, and a legacy in Nicaragua. And that's given us purpose. It's given us real focus on what we're doing. Fellowship Bible Church has a far out of proportion impact in terms of missions, considering our size. We're not a big enough church to have the kind of impact that we have. And it's because God's doing something. God is up to something. And we're just hanging on to see what he's going to do next. The first thing that comes to my mind is that God glorified himself, first of all, with 2 funerals that took place here in Conway that celebrated those men and presented the gospel. God brought himself glory in those 2 funerals in ways that I've never seen since. I think God has brought himself glory in the individual lives of people who have been touched by this. I think God has brought himself glory in the commitment to missions that Fellowship Bible Church has made. I think God has brought himself glory with the growth and the expansion of the ministry in Central America. There are basically 6 men who give their lives full time to this ministry now. You know, every solid Bible lesson that gets taught in a church in Nicaragua as a result of the Bible Institute ministry, every person who hears the gospel presented clearly, every member of a church who gets trained to handle their Bible well, every time that happens, God's kingdom is advanced and strengthened in ways that just absolutely would not have happened before. People need to hear this story because it's a part of God's story. This is a part of the story that God is telling here at Fellowship Bible Church that is a story of redemption and victory. It's a story of equipping and a story of service. It's a story of making disciples and reproducing disciples. And it's a story that is glorious and a story that is costly. It's a story that is ongoing. And people need to hear this story and become a part of it, not because of this story, but because this story is a part of the story God is telling at Fellowship Bible Church. It's important that we not forget it. It's important that we tell this story, and it's important that we retell this story, and we pass it on. This is important.